Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're waiting for some more folks to join us, but we are so excited to have this robust conversation about less than 2 weeks out from Election Day to really highlight the challenges and the opportunities, frankly, facing voters of color and in particular Latinx voters here in the United States in the 2020 cycle. So we are going to start a conversation. Just give us 1 minute as we let more people join the room. Okay. So just to get started, I just want to express my sincere gratitude to Mijente for engaging as thought partners with the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative to amplify the voices of Latinos across the country to really understand what civic engagement means beyond the ballot box, but most importantly, recognizing that the gaps that persist in mobilizing non-white voters has really infringed on our capacity to not only have an inclusive democracy, but a functioning democracy. We are really excited to have a conversation with expert voices who have distinct understandings of the geographic contours of our electoral process in the United States in the 21st century, which unfortunately is not a sophisticated process of ensuring everybody has access to the ballot box, but that their ballot ultimately will be counted. And so we are 2 weeks out from the most consequential election of our lifetime. There's still so much work that we can all play a role in doing, including voter protection. But the most important thing right now is ensuring that we have accurate information that is culturally appropriate and culturally accurate. And so in that sense, I'm so excited to welcome our panel, Marisa Franco from Mijente, Nelini from the Working Family Party. As an Angelino, I'm so jealous of New York City that you all have that party. We definitely can use that in our local government out here. And then Andrea Mercado from New Florida Majority. Florida has, for contemporary history, always been the state for which stuff is talked about because of the election processes down there. And so let's just get started, as an intro question, and audience members, you please engage with us. You can go ahead and put some questions in the chat and I'll integrate them in. But let's talk about the Latino vote. So much has been said about this idea that Latinos for the first time this election are the largest non-white eligible electorate. Black voters are still the largest number of non-white registered voters. But there has been attention. Andrea and I were part of, a documentary that was nationally broadcast on PBS. We see overtures to Latino agendas. We saw it in the Democratic primary. We saw successful ways that campaigns were really integrating the needs of Latino communities. And then here we are, the third week of October, and we have 2 weeks out. What's the state of the Latino vote in your opinion?
Sorry, was that to me, Sonja?
It's for everybody, all of you.
All right. I mean, I think here in the state of Florida, we have 23 million people and close to 6 million Latinos. And we know that, it's probably going to be close. Time and time again in Florida, statewide elections come down to less than 1%. It's with margins that close, like every vote counts. And we know, Trump can't win without Florida. And Biden can't win Florida without Black and Latino voters. So we need to do everything that we can to really mobilize Black and brown communities to the polls, especially, you know, in a state that's been like ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic, where thousands of people have lost their lives, millions of people have lost their jobs, and so many small businesses are struggling. We're out there talking to people about, you know, what's at stake. And I think we are going to see record high turnout of Latinos, but in particular, record high of Latinos voting for Biden and for Democrats down ballot.
Just to add to that, first, I just want to shout out Andrea and Nelini, as I think some of the key like one difference in this election is the key leadership that Latinas are playing across the movement. Andrea at the helm of one of the most important community organizations in the front lines, defending democracy and, like, you know, vote by vote, transforming our country. Nelini, longstanding Latina leader inside of the Working Families Party, has been, you know, instrumental in helping build capacity across the country and obviously holding it down in New York. And the broader picture we have, you know, 32 million eligible voters. You have Latinos that oftentimes are in states like California, where we form part of a very large, sending a very large message that unfortunately the way that our democratic systems are structured are in many ways not, I think, not carrying the weight that they should. So states like New York, states like California, but particularly with the emerging and the existing battleground states like Florida, states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, and then the emerging battlegrounds of Texas, Georgia, North Carolina. You know, I think that in those races, Latinos could end up being the group that probably, you know, they tend to be in some of these states very black-white kind of political frame, and Latinos could come in and be kind of a force for good, a swing vote, a swing force that actually makes a difference in some of these states. I think it's also important to name some of the down ballot races. For example, in North Carolina, Ricky Hurtado, who's running for North Carolina House, could be the first Latino ever elected. And so just overall, I think it's like that in those states, Latinos could be a margin of victory for Biden in these states that are very, very close right now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I definitely live in New York and not necessarily worried about where our state is going to go in terms of the numbers, but, you know, it took us a month to get our results because of the pandemic for our primaries. There are places across the country that, even in Pennsylvania, which is a state that we work with a lot at the party, and we have a big infrastructure there, you know, where the primaries took a long time to actually get information. And so we're not necessarily across the finish line in some of these states that folks think are okay, safe. And I think particularly because of how COVID impacted the Northeast, especially the tri-state area, you know, I remember watching every morning thousands of people die in my city, having family members of my own pass away. And, you know, I think that we underestimate the impact that it had on Latinos, because we were also seeing all the numbers, Black numbers, white numbers, and Latino numbers were just, it was at the level of almost indigenous numbers, right? It was just so high of people who were dying from COVID-19. And that does make a difference when you have your family and your friends talking about how this administration didn't care about it. And people shouldn't sleep on the Latino vote in Pennsylvania. There is a big population of Latinos, particularly in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia, people and communities of color come out. And if the Latino community comes out on blast and on whole, we'll see a difference in the state than we've seen in the last few years.
This is so dope, because I definitely want to talk about messaging. I want to talk about COVID, and then I want to talk about, you know, this idea of the Latino vote and all of the contours, because it's not a monolith. But let's start with, because this is about voter suppression. This is about how our democracy is not working for all voters. And the work that all of you do has made that clear, abundantly clear. Now, we're at a place where there has not been sophisticated messaging to first-time voters, to low propensity voters, to limited English proficient voters about how to vote, where to vote, when to vote, how to make sure your vote is counted. So Nelini, you brought up a great point, right? Which is that it was days and days. We're not going to know on election day what the outcome is. And I'll give an example in California, and we are combating at UCLA this myth of voter fraud. But in the 2018 elections, you know, election night, Orange County was still red. Not all the votes were there. They still had to be certified. It wasn't clear until probably like at least 5 days afterwards that every single congressional seat in the red curtain of Orange County actually flipped from red to blue. And in response to that, we had head honchos in the Republican Party say, oh, voter fraud, how dare you, California, blah, blah, blah. But that is a natural progression of the time that it takes our state and local election administrators to count the ballot. So on this point of messaging of how an election works, what, if at all, are you all doing to mobilize Latino and non-white voters about what to expect this year?
Yeah, I mean, well, part of it is that, you know, I think that part of the big voter suppression tool that people are using this year, particularly, I think it's been a right-wing talking point, but it's coming across as just the fallacies of how mail-in voting is not safe. And if we actually look at states like Colorado, you know, Arizona, even Oregon, which is a 90% voting by mail state, right? People do vote by mail and have for decades. And have not had, you know, all of this fraud. So one tool and tactic that we've been using is just making sure that people understand what voting by mail means, right? What voting from home means for those who do want to vote at home and vote by mail, right? Making sure and communicating to folks in their communities, communicating through channels like radio ads and things that we need, that people are listening to, whether in their job, whether in their community, right? And making sure that folks actually understand that. And another thing that's happening too, and I think is really, really important because it's directly targeted at the Latino community, is this intimidation of saying that the polling locations are not going to be safe because of militias, white supremacist violence, or people just saying that they're going to ask people if they have papers online, right? Like, and so what we've been doing is you know, we are training folks all the way, working with folks in Florida and Florida New Majority and like Florida for All Coalition to train folks to be de-escalators outside of polling places. There are lots of people who are putting on parties and fiestas. I actually just saw Andrea a video of you the other day, you know, and making sure that like people, that we remobilize, that we stop the demobilization tactics, because that's a really key part of not just traditional voter suppression, but what we're seeing this year is high amounts of intimidation for not even getting folks to actually be motivated. So let's bring the cultura, for lack of a better word, in places like Arizona and Florida and PA, and make sure we're actually motivating people to go out and vote.
I love that. And so, Andrea, you're seeing this on the ground. I also want to hear from you. What kind of support are you getting from either party? What kind of support or barriers are you seeing based on the administration of the election in your state?
Yeah, well, so we run an independent expenditure, so we do not coordinate with the Democratic Party, and we're focused on 3.7 million Black and Brown people in Florida and 19 counties. Who tend to be ignored by both political parties because they're what's called like low propensity voters. They're unlikely to vote. So oftentimes they fall outside of the models. And that's where we really focus in and encouraging people like, yes, your vote matters. And you know, in the state of Florida alone, there's 4 million people of color and young people that are eligible to vote but don't register, or are registered to vote and are not voting. So that's like our mission, and our mandate is to talk to folks about why it really does matter, especially in a state like Florida where the elections come down to these like razor thin margins. And then, you know, I mean, I think there is, we're seeing a lot of fear of people going to polling places afraid that they'll contract COVID-19, and a deep distrust of vote by mail that is being targeted by these disinformation efforts. And so, you know, I think doing that education that, you know, well, you can get that vote by mail ballot, and instead of putting it in the mailbox, I mean, we love USPS, but instead of putting it in the mailbox, you can drop it off at an early voting site. And then we have poll monitors, guardians of democracy, like our most ambitious election protection effort that we've ever done. People monitoring polling sites in Black and Brown communities in over 10 counties. So, you know, this is the second day of early voting in Florida, and it's go time. And people are out there 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Doing the work to protect and expand democracy.
This is awesome. Marisa, like part of your journey as a leader and with Mijente was, you know, figuring out how to do movement building from the ground and build that power at a time when people either wanted to stifle that power through law and policy making, or frankly, Latinos are invisible. So what's Mijente doing this cycle in terms of not only ensuring that the electorate matters, but mobilizing them and protecting their vote in places that maybe people don't even think Latinos live?
Yeah, so our primary campaign has been the Fuera Trump campaign, which overall the goal is to mobilize the broadest front possible of Latinos to take out Trump, to make him a first one-term president. And so we're doing that through one, which is foundational for us, which is the local groundwork. And so we have field campaigns in North Carolina and Georgia, which for us, we have always rejected the idea that you cannot win or build in red states. And we think those are the places where our people are often most marginalized, and that there's most potential. We have a longstanding presence in Arizona and part of a really amazing coalition of groups here that have been registering people to vote, turning people out to vote, but also taking to the streets and booting out all of the remnants of the political class that passed SB 1070, and in many ways, you know, was what kind of helped birth a new generation of organizers and organizations. And then we've been really proud to partner with the Florida Majority in Florida with the Fuera Trump campaign as like, can we be a resource? Can we be a vehicle that helps articulate or helps echo your message nationally? And so the other piece of the campaign is, okay, we have people in California, we have Raza in, you know, New Jersey, in New York, Chicago, Illinois, that maybe those places aren't battlegrounds, but how are we mobilizing folks of conscience there to then actually support in the work? And so people have been doing that through text and phone banking, and most recently through a caravana where people are traveling out of state. And I think it's important to mark, like, there's a certain point where you know, we were faced with like, well, the dangers of door knocking and traveling amidst COVID, and also the dangers of what happens if we don't reach our people, and we know that our people aren't being reached out to. I think that at the end of the day, one of the challenges we have to deal with is that there's two things I can say broadly sometimes that Latinos might say or think. And it's that, esta no me, in the Southwest, we might say, esta no es mi bronca. Maybe in Florida, we might say, eso no es mi peo. This is not my fight. And the second thing is, this is not a solution for me. I think sometimes, and so the little barriers, the inconveniences, the obstacles, when people don't fundamentally feel like they're being spoken to, they're being engaged, that their futures or their dreams or their problems are not being reflected in the platforms and the talking points of the elected officials, then it's very easy for them to walk away when they're like, well, I have to go grocery shopping, I gotta go pick up my kid, and this line is really long. And so there isn't that that muscle memory, that conciencia, but also that interest that is built. And that is, I think, our job over the long haul. And so this campaign is a vehicle to build that. But ultimately, those are the things that I think we have to contend with. And that's, in some ways, we can need to continue to push the Democratic Party candidates, but in other ways, we have to build it ourselves. Because that's actually, I think, what makes a difference with people is they're like, are you just coming here to drop off some, you know, lots of paper on my doorstep, or are you going to be here after election day? And I think we have to demonstrate to people that it isn't just that you know, that it isn't like the end goal isn't just election day. It's actually it's one important kind of marker that's part of a longer fight where people can actually see solutions and actually see that there's a reason to participate.
And this is so important, right? Because there's the descriptive representation and the substantive representation. Descriptive is that communities are able to elect people that reflect that community. Substantive is communities are able to elect people who are going to go to bat for them, that are going to represent them in their needs. Now, from my experience in thinking about the Latino vote and Latino issues, it's this idea that there's a monolith, that we're still in 2020, and we have a unity task force that puts, and Marisa, you were part of this, 5 of the 7 Latinos in the immigration, not in the economy, at a time when Latinos are instrumental to recovery. If Latinos were their own country, it's $2.7 trillion. So there's the issue. Then there's the other thing of just the worsening inequality, the anti-Blackness that has proliferated through state-sanctioned violence, and the fact that people are dying because of a pandemic that knows no bounds, but is resulting in not just Black and Latinos and Indigenous people dying, but young demographic groups. This is not just an old virus, and it gets to the systems. So we're in just a crazy year, and this is the now. This is our present. How is that impacting when you're engaging with voters and you're mobilizing them, and that things are actually resonating with them because you're meeting them where they are, and people frankly don't want to invest, don't want to talk to them? What are their hopes for the future? What are you hearing? What do they see as what they want?
Well, I mean, I think if talking about Latinos not being monolithic, that's certainly the case in Florida, home to maybe the largest conservative Latino voting bloc. But, the demographics in Florida are changing. Cubans are no longer no longer dominate the political sphere in Florida. Puerto Ricans now have they're neck and neck with Cubans in terms of the electorate. We also have so many Dominicans, Mexicans, Colombianos. And so, we're seeing more and more, a trend away from conservatism. And even within the Cuban community, younger Cubans voting much more progressive but the Republican Party, I mean, speaking to your year-round organizing, Marisa, like they contest for those voters year-round. They contest for Venezuelans, they contest for Colombians. And so I think there is a real question around how are we building infrastructure to align people around something else. And for us, it's really been around how do we talk about, not about like the politics in your country of origin, can we actually talk about what's happening in this country right now? Can we talk about how Governor DeSantis is killing our people and people in our communities and is failing to protect small businesses, and there are millions of people in the state who have yet to receive not one unemployment check, even though they lost their jobs in March. So I think, a lot of what we've been doing is, having conversations about, the here and now. And, but, we can't, and it's a challenge here because the Spanish language radio is very different than Spanish language radio in the rest of the country. It's dominated by right-wing voices. And so, I think there's a lot of work to be done, not only in an election cycle, but year-round around how are we offering different points of view, an analysis of what's really going on in Washington, D.C., what's happening in our state capital in Tallahassee when the Republican Party is defunding our hospitals and defunding our schools, and some of the stances that they're taking. And so people can't get away with just having a Latino last name in a Latino neighborhood and think they're going to win. We really do have to get much more granular in terms of what people stand for and who's going to bat for our communities, no matter what letter is behind their name, who's really championing the issues that we care about, and who's not.
This is helpful. I just want to remind the audience, you all can chat questions, so feel free and we'll integrate them. Marisa, I don't know if you wanted to say something, but Nelini, I'd love to hear about the Puerto Rican vote in Pennsylvania too.
I was just going to say really quickly, I think if you could boil it down, there's like it's like a desmadre of, it's a beehive. But like, I think what I see like across the board, even if you talk about, political difference, party difference, I think people fundamentally want respect. They want to be respected. They want to have the like, dame la palabra, like see me. And then I think people want to see results. And that's one of the biggest threats of Latinos going for Trump, is that there's this, I actually think it's like this idea of like calling him an authoritarian or a strongman is actually wrong. He is not a strongman, and he's a failuritarian before he's an authoritarian. I think, but people are so tired of like the things not happening. And I think Latinos in particular really resonate with like, you know, this kind of suspicion of politicians, and like, you know, politics is just lies and corruption, and real like open wounds around the question of corruption. That I think those are things that are actually contradictions that are leading to people kind of giving different, you know, give different looks to Trump, despite the fact that he's been disastrous, neglectful, and racist to our communities. So I think those are things that very broadly are people are looking at and looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna talk, we could talk about the Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania. I mean, I think here's the thing, it's like in 2018, right? Besides Florida, Pennsylvania was the state that Puerto Ricans went through from post Maria, right? Besides Florida, because they can't come to New York because it's too expensive. My people can't come, my family members can't come. They're like, going to Philly. And so there are 31,000 more people than there were in 2018 than there were in 2017 of Puerto Ricans alone. So you add what happened to our people during Hurricane Maria, where they remember, everybody remembers. There's every kind of family text message I have is still that image of Trump throwing paper towels at people when they had nothing. When they had my family had nothing for weeks. We couldn't even be in touch with them. So you have folks who fled an environmental crisis, weren't taken care of by the government that says they're supposed to take care of. Mind you, the colonial status, but that's a whole nother thing. Mind you, the historical status. But you have people who are coming and who are like, you know what? That happened, and then coronavirus happens a few years later, are ravaged in our community. And so two environmental disasters, basically, and health crises, public health crises, impacted Puerto Ricans. And now they are seeing, it's not just, it's, you know, the fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And that's what people are talking about. Folks in Philadelphia, Trump only won Pennsylvania by 50,000 votes. This is not a huge number. When we campaigned and championed for Kendra Brooks to be the first Working Families Party member, city council member in the city of Philadelphia, we won by 7,000 more votes than Trump did, the entire state of Pennsylvania. So these are things that are super important. So there are tons of organizations particularly in the Philly metro area, like One Pennsylvania, Make the Road Pennsylvania, and others that are doing the work to actually recruit, register Puerto Ricans now that they are able to vote, because that's the thing too, right? We're not able to vote for president when we are actually on the island, but when we live in the actual states, we have every right to vote for the president of the United States. And so it is something that is happening within the community, particularly within Puerto Ricans, where it's just like, you know, it's just like another thing, and people's backs are against the wall. And when you actually take that with the economic crisis that the island was facing to begin with, it's just continuously abusive. It's abuse. It's abuse for a community that already has a complicated relationship with the United States. But the reality is that people are actually registering to vote in volume numbers. And I'm excited that because Pennsylvania opened up their polling places early, and we're seeing overwhelming numbers, and you can register. So if you are in Pennsylvania, or if you know people, they can register to vote day of, show up and vote early.
This is really important. I want, for the audience, how does voter suppression right now, how has that been targeting Puerto Ricans that have transitioned from the island to the mainland? What are some examples of that?
I could do some examples in Florida.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. Tell us all.
Broadly, yeah. I mean, it's like the same way our unemployment system was designed to fail, our online voter registration system is designed to fail. So we sued the state in 2018 when the online voter registration system crashed. They didn't fix it. And then on the last day of voter registration in October, surprise, the system is down again, and so many people weren't able to register to vote on that last day. And then they give an extension of like a few hours, but like no time to like publicize that or to let people know that. And then it's things like, you know, the ways that the GOP has, they've had a stranglehold on our state capitol for 20 years. And so they use that to pass voter ID laws and signature no match laws. And, you know, they only have to steal, like when the election's so close, they just need like 100 votes here and 100 votes there. And so either through the laws that they pass that make it more confusing for people to vote, or outright intimidation. I mean, I'm getting texts today of a police officer fully uniformed wearing a Trump mask. I'm hearing reports of, everyone heard, Trump say, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. The chairperson of the Proud Boys is here in Florida. He's actually the state director for Latinos for Trump in Florida. And the Proud Boys are sending email messages to registered Democrats saying, I know that you're a registered Democrat, you better vote for Trump, or I know where you live. Like, it's very, it's like the kinds of threats and the kind of intimidation that we're seeing are real. And I think there's a long history of voter suppression targeting African Americans in Florida that was part of the Confederacy that goes back generations and generations. But it also can manifest in, just today, hearing that an early voting site in Little Haiti had no Haitian-speaking, in North Miami-Dade. It's the community with the most number of Haitian Americans anywhere in the country, and there's no Haitian-speaking poll workers there. So it happens in all sorts of ways, through language access, through laws, through intimidation. But voting rights is something that we still have to defend now in 2020.
I wanna kind of ask this question. So voting rights is not often considered a Latino issue, but this election cycle, and Andrea, you just like really clarified it succinctly, shows how there is a need to ensure that Latinos have fair access to the ballot box. How will voting rights increasingly become a Latino issue? And I wanna put this over to Marisa, recognizing that we're in a year of an unacceptably flawed census. We're gonna go into redistricting. All of this is about democracy.
You're going to see, this is my favorite thing to, I don't know if you all ever played Monopoly when you were a kid. I kind of did, even though whatever.
Yeah, I never won.
Yeah, well, okay, well, you're going to really feel it. There's different rules, different versions of the rules, and you usually agree to the rules. Like, do you have to own all the properties before you can buy a house? And sometimes you're like, nah, just buy a house, whatever. And there always comes a point when whoever's winning, or whoever starts to lose wants to change the rules. Like there's like a point in the game when they're like, nah, I never said that. I never agreed to that rule. Da, da, da. And it's precisely because they're starting to lose. That's basically what we're facing in this country with respect to democratic rights. The fact of the matter is that the GOP is in the minority politically. Their agenda, when you unpack it, when you show it, shine the light on it, es como una cucaracha que quiere esconderse. Porque if you really talk about what their vision is, what little exists, it's not something that is a mass popular thing. And numerically, right, demographics are changing in this country. The country is changing. And what you're going to start to see increasingly is that, and Trump has shown that he is willing to break all rules, all laws, and all norms in order to preserve power. And so that we are going to see much more as time goes on. And it is inevitable that this will be something that impacts Latinx people because, one, we are the youngest demographic in this country, and two, we are among the fastest growing communities in this country. And so by default, any erosion of democracy will undermine the basic rules of, basic representation, a representational government, even with the flaws that existed all, throughout the history of this country and very recently. This is not a perfect system, but what we're facing is something where in the naked pursuit of power and to preserve power, and the idea that anybody even going over here is an affront, is actual oppression. Trump runs on a grievance politic, right? And so it's not even that, you know, he's a billionaire, he's supposedly a billionaire, but he kind of runs as if he's a victim of something. And that type of politic is grabbing hold, and it is directly in relationship to the perception and to the idea that people being able to have some basic form of representation, people having opportunity, what I thought this country said it was about, is viewed as a threat. And I think we should be very, very clear that they will use, and we'll see it on election day and following it, they are going to use anything and everything that they can to preserve power in their hands. And it absolutely is going to impact Latinx people, because we are basically a huge part of that new Democratic majority.
Awesome. We have some questions from the audience, so I'm going to read it verbatim, and whoever wants to take it, take it. Thank you, Marisa, for speaking on the subject of respect. Given the intensely politicized nature of our current country, well, that's true, and that the Latino vote is in fact not a monolith, also true. That's me adding that. What advice do you suggest on upholding respect for each other despite differing political views, e.g. Latino Democrats respecting Latino conservatives and vice versa?
This is hard because I can definitely be somebody who likes to just be like, you know, but I actually think, I think we always have to be willing to talk to each other. And I think the best place we can find that is inside of our own families. If we're all honest with ourselves, there's a lot of political difference. There's a lot of divergent views on how we understand what's happening in the world, what we think the solutions are to the problems we're facing. And for many of us, not all of us, you know, you still find ways to come together for the birthday parties, for Thanksgiving, or por la, you know, qué sé yo. And so I do think that there is this this need to actually continue to be able to talk to each other. And maybe the place that, and maybe this is me being my most generous, because I actually do think that what some aspects of conservatism is in this time is very dangerous. I see it as a threat to my children, to my friends' children, to our future generations, to our planet. I do think it's dangerous, and so I don't want to mince words. But I think that as Latinos, there is an aspect of sometimes, yeah, neither party is actually looking out for us. But therein lies, okay, what are we going to do about it? And that's where I think it is important to actually, we need to build organization. We need to build organization that's actually rooted. And if we actually really stick to what is it that people are facing, what is it that people need, and what are the things that are going to solve the problems, I think that we can actually do more good than bad. But I think at the end of the day, especially right now, we are living in times that I would almost consider at different points apocalyptic. And I think the worst thing we can do is to turn away from each other.
Yeah, that was super generous and helpful and thoughtful. I mean, this idea of discourse, right? And that's part of organizing. Okay, next question from the audience. This is such an important conversation! Exclamation point. Will there be a time for Nelini to share a song to inspire us all? I've been trained as an election defender and think music is such a powerful tool for us in movement building and messaging. Perhaps a general question. How does your group use music and song to organize and protect?
Oh my God, that's amazing. Thank you for coming to the trainings. That's great. I mean, we're trying to figure out with Working Families Party. I'm also a proud member of Mijente, and we definitely use song and music from everything from dancing at convenings, which I wish we could still have these days, to celebrating and using that as a uniting thing. But I think that one of the things that the movement has lost in a big way, or we just lost creativity. Creativity is not just getting the most famous people that we know to just parrot a particular phrase or to say our talking points. Like, that's not creativity and that is not connecting to actually what our ancestors handed down to us, what our cultures have told us, and particularly in the Latino community, where it has a variety of different music, art, folklore cultures, right? And so for me, working families, we're just getting into it because we've been having a transition over the past decade or so of becoming a different organization. But for me, culture and creativity is essential to change. You have to change the culture. And I do believe that we're changing it in a lot of ways, but I think that there is still a lack of creativity that is coming from our spaces, no matter what, whether it's Black, Latino, whatever. I think we kind of went into the celebrity framework of like, let's actually just have celebrities do stuff for us, instead of who are the artists in our communities that can make street art? Who are the singers in our communities that can, as we did on Friday, release an album and have it be played and have a song that's called All You Fascists Bound to Lose, that is a remake of an old Woody Guthrie song, right? I think, so that's how with the chorus, with the Resistance Survival chorus, is that we created something, and we create music and arts and use that as a form of resistance and a form of advocating for ourselves.
This is
Can
helpful.
I speak on that? I have to speak on that.
Yeah, please.
I mean,
please.
I think I couldn't agree more with you, Nelini, because it's culture, our food, like that's part of building organizations that people want to be a part of, and how we bring together the discipline and the rigor and the data of electoral campaigning with that creativity and passion of social movements. And it's, Sandra, who decorated our float for the event that we did with Mijente this past weekend, or Miguel, who made the piñatas, or Dissam, who's doing graffiti artist, who's doing a mural for us, or whoever's going to cook the food for the next meeting. Like all of those things are like part of how we, it's part of our identity, and it's like we have to be able to leverage our poetic excellence, our cultural brilliance in service of our shared purpose. And I think, Mijente has done that, for years. I think there's a lot of people that have been trying to figure it out, but it oftentimes gets like marginalized or siloed, and really trying to create the space for that to take root and really thrive in our ecosystem is something that all of us need to be thinking about and nourishing.
It's fascinating to me because, my journey was being the daughter of two activists. So I was like, we had a Radio Red Flyer wagon. We went with them everywhere to the marches. And for me, in thinking about SB 1070 in Arizona, it comes back to Pete Wilson and Prop 187 in California. And I remember hitting a piñata of Pete Wilson as a little kid. And that was it. That was at the, we were all, and then 2016 happened. And I remember driving across the country from California to Virginia to go do voter protection and seeing piñatas, not just in California, but in Texas and in Georgia, and being shocked because I hadn't seen a piñata like that in over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And that's the representation of what this means. And even, when I left, I remember my tío Manuel hitting a piñata in our front yard, and I'll let it know. And it is something where there is the creativity, there is the culture, there's the way that is emblematic, and that does not exist in our government functions of how we outreach. And it's not saying that local elections administrators have to have piñatas or music, but they need to actually ensure that voters in their jurisdiction can cast the ballot, and that's simply not happening. And so I want to highlight this issue of voter suppression, this issue of the barriers. So Mijente has been doing a lot of groundwork in North Carolina. From what I understand this cycle, the three organizations, including Mijente, that are there, weren't there in previous cycles. So that goes to the lack of investment, sustained investment on the part of parties and infrastructure building. But on top of that, you have an emerging Latino electorate. Latinos are young, 6 out of 10 are millennial or younger. Many of us that are young, we're born here, we're gonna age into the electorate. That said, other people that are naturalizing, and this is a question from the chat, what are we doing around naturalization? In order to register to vote in a state like North Carolina, and you go online to the DMV site, it's all in English, take 6 clicks. until you actually get to the registration form. It's not even a simple button. You got to have access to Wi-Fi. We know the digital divide, but it's in English. And to the point that you brought up, Andrea, about the Haitians, under federal law, under Section 203, if you hit a certain percentage threshold, people need to have access to language translation in both writing, but also in casting a ballot. And that's not happening. It's not being enforced. We know that. And so let's talk about this issue that voters who are non-white and non-high propensity likely voters are having trouble just casting a ballot because of the issues that remain, where we are investing in just a finite part of the electorate. And we see this. So I'm going to bring up this frame and you tell me, and Nelini, I'm so glad you're in Pennsylvania because this is where money is going. If money is trickling down to the Puerto Ricanos, that's a different story. But there's been a focus on Michigan, on Pennsylvania, and on Wisconsin. And then there's this kind of trivial thing, if you will, by the mainstream on kind of the southern part of this country. And yet the southern part of this country is a path towards sustainability because these people are younger. And once they get baked in, they're going to turn out. But the resources are really going to these other places for persuasion. What's your response or reaction to that? And what are we learning from this cycle that seems to be necessary for 2024 in the Latino vote?
I mean, so I think that there's two things. I think one is that, the way the resources flown is always flawed. And I don't want to, I think when we start to get into, well, what about these states? Those are states with also big Black populations. And as somebody, like, it's not like people invest in the Black community all the time either. And I know the difference, right? Like there is definitely a difference of investment in our communities, but as someone who is, is Afro-Latina, I think it's really important. So I feel that like, here is the thing. It's about like, I think there are three things that are important. One is long-term investment. It's just who is investing in long-term organizations that are building in the states where we do have big populations, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, like the long-term infrastructure is really important. And we're never gonna get it from the political class because every 4 years, every 2 years, the political class, it changes. It's like, oh, maybe this is gonna be a swing state this year. Maybe this, for years, Ohio was that state that got money pouring into it, and now they're not. And that doesn't mean there's still not Black folks. There are a lot of Latino farm workers in Ohio. And so I just think that if we wait for the political class to tell us where they're going to put their money and resources to, I think it's about what are the organizations that are building long-term infrastructure and how we support that and continue to amplify that, because we're only going to save ourselves. And I think that it is why I work at a third party and an independent party, because of the way the two-party system works. They are just trying to game out the electoral college for themselves. And so I think in that kind of, so with that in terms of how the parties work and investment there, and for everybody else, I just think that it's like, there is immense amount of power that has actually been built and organizations that have been built, especially the last decade. And I'm really proud of seeing organizations grow, like organizations like New Florida Majority that have grown so much and so immense for when I lived in Florida in 2012. Seeing organizations like Mijente that didn't exist 5 years ago, that has grown into an organization where we have chapters and bases across the country. Like seeing Working Families Party, where we came from a few states in the Northeast to actually grow. That's what I have hope in. And I want us to continue to support the organizations that are on the ground that are doing that work. And that's where I see the new generation. And yes, we need to do it way quicker than the time that it's happening now. But I do think it's really important that if we wait for the political class, they're never going to invest in the states the way that we want them to. But we have to actually advocate and invest in ourselves and making sure we have platforms to actually say what the work that we're doing is in our communities. All right, talk about it.
That's helpful. So I know we're almost at time. I have two questions for you all. One is, we're 2 weeks away. And we know that the election is not going to be called the evening of election night. It's just simply, with mail-in voting, it's going to take a while to count. But here's the thing, it's not fraudulent. You actually have a paper record. It's safe during COVID when we see Black and brown people dying disproportionately and being infected. What's your message right now to people? We have 2 weeks. What can people do? And how do you want to message what they should be doing post November 3rd around this election? Andrea, let's start with you. I'm sure you have some talking points.
Sure. I mean, I was just going to say, we're not going to like analyze our way to victory on election night. There's 2 weeks left. If you haven't volunteered yet, this is a great time to join a remote phone bank, or to do some, socially distanced lit drops, or come to, some canvassing events. So just really want to encourage folks to, wherever you live, you can plug in. For us, you can find that information at floridaforall.vote. Again, that's floridaforall.vote. I think there's just really encouraging people to like talk to your neighbors, to your family, to your niece or nephew who, you think might not go out to vote if you don't really encourage them to make a plan or go together to go vote during early voting. And here in Florida, by law, our vote by mail has to be counted in advance of election day. So we're feeling, really hopeful that we might be able to find out sooner, given how many people are voting by mail and are voting early. And we haven't had a president go to the White House without Florida in close to 100 years. So we're just, at this point, it's really doing everything that we can to talk to every single voter we can, to mail in their ballot, to go out and vote early. And we know that the GOP is mobilizing and motivating their base because we see them out there. So just really encouraging folks to jump on in with us.
Marisa?
I just second everything that Andrea said in terms of the last message for the next few weeks. I think it's important to like continue to let people know that we shouldn't expect. The thing that's coming to mind is like basically flipping a dicho que este arroz no se ha cocido. So this thing is not over. It's not called. I think we have a big heavy lift because Latinx people are not always like the frontline people that folks are trying to communicate and inform. We have to be able to really deliver a message about, there may not be results on election night, and that people should be very mindful of where they're getting their information. And I think the basic message in terms of post-election scenarios is, look, Trump's failures have cost us, and he is doing everything he can to preserve his hold on power, to calm his very large ego. The GOP made a deal with the devil and in siding with Trump, and together they're willing to do anything and everything to hold on to power. We have a very simple role of turning them back. We should turn them back on the streets. We should turn them back in the ballot box. And we need to ensure that every vote is counted. We need to ensure that everybody has their say and that the results of that process is respected. And going beyond election day, we need to continue to make sure that this government actually works for us, works for our people, that we continue to run people, that we build the coalitions and the campaigns that are necessary to actually win the things that we're voting for today. But I think being able to kind of give people a sense like, no es un cucuy. They're going to make a jugada, they're going to try to make a play, but at the end of the day, it's not a strong man's play. It's a weak, sore loser's play. And our job is to turn them back at every single step of the way. And so we have to both kind of have our people understand that that's what's happening here. And we've all seen that. We've seen that in the places we come from. We see it in our barrios. We've seen it. And so no es algo nuevo. And we have gone through this and we will get through this. But we have to ensure cada paso por paso, like we have to ensure and we have to make sure that the process is respected and people's voice is heard.
Super dope and powerful, both about the misinformation and then the messaging about the response to continue to fight for dignity and as you said, you know, respect, fundamental respect. Nelini, thoughts?
I mean, I agree with everything that was just said. Folks, there are 2 weeks to get out the vote. Talk to your family, talk to your friends. Like everyone should be at least daily texting 5 family members and 5 friends. You don't even have to go to a spoke or hustle training. Like talk to 5 people each day that are members of your family or friends and tell them to go out and vote, because every vote is going to count in this election cycle. And I think it's really important for everybody to have to be out on election day and showing a sense of joy. There's going to be a lot more, you know, if what we are seeing in Florida and Georgia during these last 2 weeks of early voting, I think it's important to actually bring joy. So if you got nothing to do on election day, go outside your local polling place and like hand out maybe PPE, right? You know, you can always sign up at electiondefenders.org to get trained, and we'll slot you in places across the country at polling locations. But also just go out and maybe just do some street chalk drawing, right? Anything that we can do to bring some joy to the people who are, yesterday texted 2 to 3 hours online. So let's just motivate people to stay online. Maybe give them a banana. I don't know. It's hard during COVID to figure out what people are going to take from you, but show some support for folks who are going to stand online if you've already voted. And don't forget to make your plan for voting, because it's not going to happen if you don't actually think about the time, when you're going to go, and your polling place.
Awesome. So last question before we wrap. What's going to be the most interesting headline about the Latino vote after November 3rd? Andrea?
The last what after November 3rd?
What's going to be the most interesting headline about the Latino vote after Election Day?
Oh, that's it, that we showed out. You know, there's always this, you know, talk about Latinos as a sleeping giant, or that we're not voting at the levels that we should. I think the most interesting headline is that, you know, from coast to coast, urban to rural, no matter where you're from, that young voters, old, that we showed out and that we helped change the future trajectory of this country.
Marisa?
I hope to see headlines that frame our community as difference makers, as a swing force for good, and as a community that gets to have the last laugh on a clown that has done nothing but fail us, misrepresent us, disparage us, and that we send a very unequivocal message, and that, yeah, we get the last laugh, and that message is a very resounding fuera.
Nelini?
I mean, I agree with everything else. I especially just for my people want to hold, you know, you throw the paper towels at us, we throw you out of the White House. So I hope that there is a story about Puerto Ricans and all that we've been through, that we were a deciding factor in kicking Trump out of office. So I gotta just have some pride in that moment.
I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Mijente for partnering with us to elevate this conversation about a really important part of democracy, which is that not everybody gets to participate in it because of failed leadership. And it's the power of communities, it's the power of civil society organizations, the power of trusted messengers. We're not celebrities and not politicians, but family members and our teachers and our doctors and healthcare workers that know what these communities need. And it's access, like Marisa said, to fundamental respect, it's dignity, but it's also, for me, the headline is that we get to see our families again. right? That we're going to overcome this pandemic in a place where we can engage in love in ways that are not physically distant. And so thank you to all of you. For the audience, we got 2 weeks, right? And I think the most important thing that we can do is spread accurate information, especially if your community members or families look to you for advice. We have a duty to make sure that the advice that we're giving is correct, and also for understanding that there's misinformation and suppression out there, and there's ways to get out. So thank you, go vote, have a plan, and please stay safe.